12:30. So I have to improvise and have to answer. I'm going to answer some questions, but I'm going to do that in a shorter period of time. So I've got a hard stop at 12:30 Eastern time. So it is 11:46, and I was in the middle of reviewing another document. So this is going to be fun because this is impromptu. But I want to answer a specific question. I want to answer a specific question that came up last week regarding Lowry Street, whatever that means. Anyway, I'm going to do continue. So invite your audience to connect to their Facebook to Restream. I'm just going to copy this, Control C, close, and I'm going to post this. I don't know if, okay, so welcome to Q&A Friday. Thomas Dimitrovich here, and happy to be here. And like I said earlier, I have a hard stop at 12:30. And I want to navigate into, hey, Nihad. So anyway, I'm going to navigate my way into answering this question. And here's the question, which seemed at face value a very simple question. If you recall, and I can't remember who made it, I don't know if it was JW or who it was, but they said, look, if I have a 1200 amp circuit breaker and I adjust the long time pickup to 1600 amps, and if I take 0.8 times 2000 amp circuit breaker, 2000 amp circuit breaker, 0.8 times 2000 is 1600 amps. The question was, if I take a 2000 amp circuit breaker, adjust it to 1600 amps, and I put 1600 amps worth of conductor on that circuit breaker, can I use, and it's only an 80% rated overcurrent device, can I use that circuit breaker or that conductor at 100% of its ampacity? So what do we have? We have a circuit breaker that is 2000 amps. I wish I had MobiCam. I don't have MobiCam, but that's okay. I don't have MobiCam. So MobiCam is disabled right now. So if I have a circuit breaker that is 2000 amps, and I do have to write this down though. So here's what I'm going to do. I am going to do this. Blank presentation. I am going to do blank. I'm going to change this to a black background, because this is here's my thought process. This seemed like a no-brainer question. But the more I thought about it, the more that I realized there's a lot more to this question than what is at face value. So let me go into, how do I do this? PowerPoint. There we go. And then I got to put me in there. Where am I at? Nope. There I am. Welcome. Okay, so here's what we have. We have a 2000 amp circuit breaker. New. I'm going to insert a text box. So I have a 2000 amp frame breaker. White. And I have a 1600 amp trip. All right, so I have a 2000 amp frame breaker. I have 1600 amps trip. If I go to table 310.16 in the 2020 code book, 2000 amps worth of conductor, if I divide 2000 amps and let's say I do a 600 kc mil, has an ampacity at 75 degrees C. Why am I using 75 degrees C ampacity? Because it is the rating of the breaker. Hey, Felix. TSDN, Technical Social Distancing Network. So 2000 divided by 420 is 4.76. So I need 5, quantity 5, 600 kc mil conductors is equal to 5 times is 420 amps. That's 2100 amps, 2100 amps. Okay. I got my North Carolina Institute. Look at that. This thing is full. It's a Yeti, and it's full of coffee. So here was the question, and I'm going to lay this out. What this gentleman asked me and during our last Friday call, he says, can I use, so what's 1600 amps? Let's just use 600 kc mil. So if I had 1600 amps, 1600 divided by 420 is 3.8. So quantity 4, 600 kc mil is equal to 4 times 420 is 1680, 1,680 amps. All right, so I have a 2000 amp frame breaker. It tastes better in a Shock Week mug. That's right, Felix. I don't have any more of those puppies. So, and I think yours was the most expensive Shock Week mug ever on the face of the earth. So here we go. We got a 2000 amp frame breaker, 1600 amp trip. And what this gentleman said, can I connect 4 600 kc mil? In essence, this is what he said. 4 600 kc mil conductors to this 2000 amp frame breaker, adjust it to 1600 amps because I'm protecting 1600 amps worth of conductor, and use that conductor at 100% without using a 100% rated circuit breaker. And his logic was, or his question was, my circuit breaker is a 2000 amp breaker. It is, what's 1.25 times 1600? 1.25 times 1600 is 2000 amps. So I have a 2000 amp rated breaker. I'm applying 1600 amps worth of load at 100% of the conductor ampacity, which is 4 600 kc mils. Hey, Gustavo, good to see you, brother. And then he says, is that okay? Can I do that? So I'm using an 80%. Here's what he's doing. He's taking, let's just look at what he's doing. I have 1600 amps. So let's do this. New duplicate. We have 1,600 amps of continuous load. And this is how we would apply the code. 1,600 amps of continuous load. What do? We take 1.25 times 1,600, 1,600 amps. And what do we get? We just did it, but I'm going to do it again. 1.25 times 1,600 is 2,000 amps. Okay, so 1.25 times 1,600 is 2,000 amps. Now, if I had this in an application, because let's say it's a branch circuit, I would go to 210.19 and 210.20 are the two key sections. 210.19 is where I get into, I do two calculations. The first one in 210.19a, branch circuits not more than 600 volts. I would do a branch circuit shall have an ampacity not less than the larger of 210.19A1A or A1B. So what I do is I have to do two calculations. A1A says that I have to include the 125%. So I take, it says, so when I do a, where a branch circuit supplies continuous loads or any combination of continuous and non-continuous loads, the minimum branch circuit conductor size shall have an ampacity not less than the non-continuous plus the 125% of the continuous. So if it was 1600 amps worth of continuous, I would do the calculation in A, take the 1600 times 1.25, I'd come up with 2000 amps, go to 310.16, pick my conductor for 2000 amps, which is 5 600 kc mil conductors. And then as part of 210.19A 1B, I would do the minimum branch circuit conductor size shall have an ampacity not less than the maximum load to be served after the application of any adjustment or correction factors in accordance with 310.15. So I would not be applying the 1.25. I would just apply the ambient temperature correction factors and the conditions of use factors and figure out what amp value I would come out with there. And I can't do the calculation here because I don't have the conditions of use. I've not established that. But regardless of what I do in 210, in these two, what does 210.20A tell me? 210. I hope I got that right. 210.20 is overcurrent protection, and A says where a branch circuit supplies continuous loads or any combination of continuous and non-continuous loads, the rating of the overcurrent device shall not be less than the non-continuous load plus 125% of the continuous load. So in no case in a branch circuit, and I would argue in a feeder as well, and I wouldn't make that argument in a service conductor, a 230 conductor, but a 210 and a 215 conductor, I will argue that you cannot have an overcurrent protective device that is applied for 1600 amps worth of continuous load that doesn't include the 1.25. Even if in 210.19A1, even when I do those two, if I have to meet 210.20A. Now, let's go back to this question. A 2000 amp frame circuit breaker is 20% larger than the 1600 amp continuous load. So what the question was related to is that since I have a 2000 amp circuit breaker and I have 1600 amps worth of continuous load, 1.25 times 1600 is 2000. I have a 2000 amp frame circuit breaker, but I'm only going to put 1600 amps worth of conductor. I'm only going to put 4 600 kc mil conductors on that circuit breaker. So what you have, and I'm going to do this again, new duplicate. And I'm going to draw a circuit breaker here, and I'm going to draw a conductor. I know it's I spent a lot of time, studying how to do artistic things in. What color do we want to give the circuit breaker? We're going to give it like an orangey color. I think that circuit breakers operate better when they're actually, we're going to give them I can't give them a black color. We'll give them an Eaton blue color. There we go. An Eaton blue color circuit breaker. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to say, this is a F2. This is a 2000 amp frame circuit breaker. And a 1600 amp trip circuit breaker. And I am going to copy this. Actually, I'm just going to use it again. And I'm going to say 1600 amps of continuous load. amps of continuous load. Now, the question is, that circuit breaker is an 80% rated circuit breaker. So %80 rated. What do we mean by that? Now remember, what does that mean? When I have an 80% rated breaker, this 2000 amp frame circuit breaker, let's talk about how it is tested as per the UL standard. I take a 2000 amp frame circuit breaker, and here's the, we're missing this. We're missing something here. Control C. Here's what we're missing. Control V. And we're going to say quantity for, we'll put this down here. Quantity for 600 kc mil conductors. And this is an 80% rated breaker. This is what the question was right here. And they said, is this okay? Would I pass? A field inspection or a plan review? And I am just doing something real quick. I'll fix it later. Anyway, so what do you guys think? Nick Tesla, do you think this is fine? I can't remember who asked this question. Do you think that this is perfectly fine? I have 1600 amps worth of continuous load. I have 4 600 kc mil conductors. Total ampacity of that, based upon if I'm following table 310.16, the conditions of use for that would be not more than 3 current carrying conductors in a raceway, cable, or earth. Directly buried, and I'm within the 30 degrees C, all that good stuff. So is this okay? And remember, if you remember last Friday, at first I was like, well, no. And then I said, well, no, you can. And then I said, well, wait a second. Think about the differences here. Let's, here's what I am going to do. I'm going to move this over. And I'm going to Control CV. I'm going to draw another one. And I'm going to say 5 kc mil. And that would be what? 600 kc mil, 420, 5 times 2100 amps. 2,100 amps. Which one of these is the right application? 80% rated breaker upstream in both cases, 2,000 amp frame breaker, 1,600 amp trip, 1,600 amps worth of continuous load. Which one is the correct installation? Is it option quantity 4, 600 kc mil, or quantity 5, 600 kc mil? Now, before I answer that question, I am going to take you to 240.6. What does 240.6 say? First of all, let's look at, this is a branch circuit. Okay, so both of these are a branch circuit. Both of these are a branch circuit. So if I go to 210.6, 210.19. Now, what do we know by 210.19? We know that 210.19 tells us, or 210.20a. Let's look at 210.20a. It says, where a branch circuit supplies continuous loads or any combination of continuous loads and non-continuous loads. So what is a continuous load? A continuous load is a load that operates for 3 hours or more. Let's go to the definition. I know 3 hours is in there, but is it 3 hours or more than 3 hours? A load where the maximum current is expected to continue for 3 hours or more. So if I have lighting loads that I know are going to be on all day, I'm 3 hours or more, that is a continuous load. So let's say this is continuous lighting load. (1600 amps) continuous lighting load on a branch circuit. So we're getting more and more specific. So we know it's a continuous load, 3 hours or more. It's 1600 amps worth of that. I have a 2000 amp frame, 1600 amp trip breaker. Can I put 600 kc mils, 4 of them or 5? Now, what does 240.6? Michael Sullivan, I got to write. Somebody's using the S word. Neiman, Nick Tesla, you never use the S word. It's not good. Not on my channel, buddy. So I'm going to take you guys over to 240. Article 240. If you go to 240.6, yes, standard ampere ratings. 240.6. Now, this is an adjustable trip circuit breaker. And what it says is the rating of adjustable trip circuit breakers having external means for adjusting the current setting, long time pickup setting. Now, remember what the long time pickup setting is, right? That's that across the top. That's that long time pickup. That's what gives you your conductor protection. Not meeting the requirements of 240.6c. What is 240.6c? 240.6c is the restricted access. So I don't have the restricted access. Shall be the maximum setting possible. So the rating of this circuit breaker is 2000 amps, regardless of what you set it at, if you don't lock the cover. So let's go back to 210.19 and 20. 210.20. Let's just going to start there. 210.20a. Where a branch circuit supplies continuous loads or any combination of continuous or non-continuous loads, the rating of the overcurrent device shall not be less than the non-continuous load plus the 125% of the continuous load. So what is the rating of this device? Is 2000 amps, not 1600 amps. It's 2000 amps. But I have to protect the conductor at its ampacity. So what I would have to do is put 5 600 kc mil conductors on a 2000 amp rated circuit breaker. I can't adjust the circuit breaker to 1600 amps, not lock the cover, and put only 1600 amps worth of conductor on it. I'd have to put 2000 amps worth of conductor on it, right? Because the rating of that breaker is 2000 amps. I have to protect the conductor at its rating, which is only 1600 amps. But I have to protect it. I have to protect it with a breaker rated no more than its ampacity, unless it's less than 800 amps. So now what does C tell us? 240.6c says a circuit breaker that has restricted access to the adjusting means shall be permitted to have an ampere rating that is equal to the adjusted current setting. Restricted access shall be achieved by one of the following methods. I can locate it behind a removable or sealable cover, which I moved my breakers, which is that little door that's over top of the trip unit. It can be located behind a bolted equipment enclosure doors. So that would be like an industrial control panel where you have a bolted door. Located behind locked doors, accessible only to qualified person. That could be the door of the panel board. It could be the door of the room. It doesn't say which door. If I lock the room and the panel board is in the room, even though the door of the panel board is not locked, if I lock the door going into that room and that door is only accessible by qualified persons, then I meet 3. And then 4 is password protected. So I have what if you recall on Tuesday, I think it was Tuesday. Yeah, it was Tuesday. I talked about circuit breakers and I showed you that those electronic breakers and our new power defense breakers that had the password protected. That would fall under 4. So if I have a 2000 amp frame circuit breaker adjusted to 1600 amps, and I lock the cover, it's no longer a 2000 amp frame breaker. It's no longer a 2000 amp rated breaker. It's now a 1600 amp rated breaker. So let's go back to 210. If I go to 210.20a, it says, where a branch circuit supplies continuous loads or any combination of continuous and non-continuous loads, the rating of the overcurrent device, the rating, which now is 1600 amps, remember? Because 240.6 with the locked cover says that I can adjust it to 1600 amps, and now its rating is 1600 amps. So that 1600 amp rating shall not be less than the continuous plus 125% of the continuous loads. So now, if I lock this cover, so this would be over here, I'm going to say no 240.6C, no 240.6 Charlie. So that's an 80% rated breaker. No, you don't have 240. You don't remember. Let's just make sure I get my numbers right. 240.6. You don't have a 240.6C application. Restricted access, 240.6C. So I don't have 240.6C. I have to have 2000 amps worth of conductor because it's a 2000 amp rated circuit breaker. The rating of that breaker is 2000 amps. Then my 1600 amps is perfectly fine. I could even adjust my long time pickup down to 1600 amps if I wanted to, but I don't have to because I have 2000 amps worth of breaker and 2000 amps worth of conductor. I'm protecting the conductor at its ampacity. I'm serving 1600 amps worth of continuous load every day, all day, day and night. I don't care. Let them lights burn, brother. So let's look at the other case. This, if I did a yes, 240.6 Charlie, okay, if I have 240.6 Charlie and I lock it and it is 1600 amps, then I can protect 1600 amps worth of conductor, but I cannot. I could only serve 1600 times 0.8, 1,280 amps of load. So I could not do that. But I could do that. Because 1280 is 80% of a 1600 amp circuit breaker. Now, that would follow the requirements in the code. So that would be the only way that I would be able to apply that circuit breaker correctly and accurately per its rating and per the code. So if it's an 80%, now what I could do is new duplicate. I could change this to a 100% rated breaker, and then do 1600 amps worth of continuous load. And that breaker would have to be 100% rated. The enclosure that it's in would have to be able to accommodate 100% rating. And that would be the two ways that you can accommodate 1600 amps worth of continuous load with 4 600 kc mil conductors on a 2000 amp frame breaker at 1600 amp trip, meeting the requirements of 240.6 Charlie, meaning you're locking the cover, or you've got the password protected, or it's in a locked room, etc. Now, let's take a look. Does this apply to feeders? So if we go to 215, if I go to 215.2, minimum rating and ampere and size, so 215.2 aligns with 210.19. 215.3 aligns with 210.20a. And what you'll recognize there, it's the 215.3 that makes sure that you do not have more current on a conductor than 80% of the rating of the conductor on that breaker, unless you have a 100% rated overcurrent device in a 100% rated enclosure. Those are the two key sections. I'm going to say them again, 215.3 and 210.20a. Now, what about services? I was talking to Mr. John McCamish this morning, and I asked about this question. And what he pointed out, and he concurs with this as well. And I also talked to Danesh Zia, and he concurred. But what John pointed out, he says, Tom, go take a look at Article 230. And if I go to 230 in Part 7, Service Equipment Overcurrent Protection, I have a 230.90a, which talks about the ungrounded conductor. There's nothing in 230.90a that mentions the 1.25 like we had in 215.3 and in 210.20a. And if I look at the service conductor, where's the service entrance conductors, is in 230.42, minimum size and ampacity. I do have exactly the same as what you have in 210 and 215. In 210.19a1 talks about you have the maximum size based upon two different calculations. You throw in the 1.25 or you don't. And then in 215.3 215.2. No, 215. 215.2 would violate the style manual. 215.2, it is. 215.2 has the same language as 230.42, minimum size and ampacity. But what you don't have in the service is similar language to what is found in 210.20a and 215.3. You don't have the language that says the overcurrent protective device must always be sized at 1.25 times the continuous loads. And that is probably, to John's point, probably because of the diversity when you're up there at the service. You have a lot of loads that'll come on and go away and come on and go away. So that is another important distinction. So this simple question, actually, I learned something about that, what I just told you about the difference in 210 and 215 and 230. 210.20a, 215.3, 230 does not have an equivalent section, which was, I thought, very interesting. But in any case, that is how you answer that question. It is such a good question that I appreciate whoever it was that asked it. Yes, Felix, on the left, these conductors are being used at 100% of their rating. And over here on the right, I'm going to say ampacity. I'm using the breaker at 100% of its rating because it is technically per 240.6c rated at 1600 amps. I can use 4 600 kc mills up to 1600 amps, right? At their ampacity, because if I go to 1680, ultimately it's going to trip. But I could use those 4 600 kc mills at 1600 amps. The breaker and the equipment is 100% rated, and I have 1600 amps worth of continuous load. On the other one, the 2000, the second one that I don't have the 240.6c, I've got to have 2000 amps worth of conductor. That's why I have 5 600 kc mills, and they can serve 80% of the 2000 amps, which is 1600 amps. I could set that breaker to trip at 1600 amps, but I don't have to. I could take this circuit breaker and say, look, we'll do an or 2000 amp trip, because either way, I'm protecting 2000 amps worth of conductor at 2000 amps. I just happen to have 1600 amps worth of load on it. That's a good question. I thought this was a very good question because it took me down many different roads. I did learn something new about Article 230 that I guess I knew about because we've applied it, but I've never really thought about it in light of the 100% versus 80% rated discussion. So that's all I'm going to have time to answer today. But I'm sharing with you what my journey to answer that question, and I had plans to look at a few more other questions, but I'm definitely not going to get time to get to that because I've got a 12:30 conference call I've got to get on. But I thought I'd share that with everybody because, in my opinion, it was a good exercise. And whoever asked that question, thank you for asking that question. So my answer to your original question was no. You cannot take a 2000 amp frame, 80% rated breaker, adjust it to 1600 amp trip, put 1600 amps worth of conductor, and use that 1600 amps worth of conductor at 100% of its ampacity. That would violate, if it's a branch circuit, it would violate 210.20a and 210.2019. No, it would violate 210.20a. If it was a feeder, it would violate 215.3. But on a service, you might be able to do that. All right, Timothy, I appreciate the feedback. And thanks, Nihad. It's 12:27. I'm going to jump on another call. So I appreciate you guys tuning in for Q&A Friday. And thanks for that question, because, you know, I learned something and I shared that with all of you, and I hope that it did some good. So thanks, everybody. And thanks for what all of each of you do for electrical safety and the electrical industry. I hope you have a great weekend. Make it yours. And we will see you next week. It was a deep revision of services, feeder, circuit breakers. Great to all. Thanks. You're welcome. Thank you. And Lisa, thank you, Lisa, for tuning in. Thanks, Felix, Nihad. We had Egypt. We had Colombia, South America. We had, where else? I don't know what other countries we had involved. We even had the Nikolai Tesla on the line. So thanks for joining in as well. So everybody out there, I'm going to run. Take care. Stay safe. God bless. And please, please, stay healthy. Signing off. Talk to you later.